Well, welcome everybody. My name is Pat Quinn. I am the president of the Broomfield Open Space Foundation, and I'll give a little speech there. We are a nonprofit organization that works for enhancing the experience in open space in Broomfield. We have a fishing derby every year. We've helped the city and county with funds for trails. We gave $3,000 to match some funds for McKay Landing, and we've helped get trails built, in Boulder County, and connections. And so the Open Space Foundation is a great project. If you want more information, go to broomfieldopenSpaceFoundation.org, and there is, believe it or not, a Donate Now button. So, if you guys can donate, it would be greatly appreciated. One of the things that we've been doing in the last couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years, has been we've been doing a speaker series. And I want to thank Eleanor McKinley in particular for working hard on this with Kristen Pritz, who always makes us look good. And we've had just a variety of speakers, and it has been absolutely fascinating to come to all the speaker series. We had the cranes, the sand cranes was the whooping cranes, of Nebraska. And I spent my first 10 years in Nebraska, and I didn't know about the whooping cranes, and so Anyway, the speaker series have been incredible, and one of the things that we thought we might want to do. Because we often reminisce about the old days on open space, and there's a lot of people in here that also share this experience with us. We decided we would have this informal panel tonight talking about the open space program, how it came about, because so few people, other than the people that have been involved, really appreciate the history of the open space and how it came out of. I won't use the word citizen activist because that sometimes can be negative, but how it came. The citizens of Broomfield got together and sponsored several things over the years. And so with that as the backdrop, we'll start with Gene Patterson, who's going to give you the background on the field.
Anyway, my part will be a short introductions to all the incarnations the field has been through before it came to its final perfect destination, which is open space. And in the beginning, there was the field. The field was owned by a farmer named Kozisek. The field at that time was not divided by a street, not even by a dirt or gravel road. But there was a small lake on the property. Nearby was a small community, Broomfield, also a railroad and a depot. As the years passed, the community of Broomfield continued to grow, and the Kozisek family farm sold the 115-acre field to Oak Hill Town Home developers. Now that's something I didn't know. When all the times I've spent working with open space, I didn't realize that farm was sold twice to developers. So they had planned, Oak Hill developers planned to build apartments and townhomes on the field with over 2,000 units. But thankfully, a few years later, Oak Hill Development in turn sold the acreage to AT&T, who planned to build a training facility and a campus on the property for the employees of Bell Labs, Western Electric, and AT&T. And that was about the time that the Western Electric Company started building on East 120th, their big facility up there. The plan for the campus that they were going to leave most of the very area undeveloped, with central buildings for classrooms, parking, and lodgings for the students. It was supposed to be similar to a college campus. To the community, this seemed like a reasonable use of the area, with much of the land left over with native grass and walking paths. More years passed, no campus was built, and the field stayed open and undeveloped. The town of Broomfield continued to grow and also to love their open field. Then AT&T was restructured and no longer needed a campus in Broomfield. So they sold the 150-acre field to Johnson Development for another housing development. And this development was supposed to be for single-family homes with 400 houses. Can you imagine the field covered with 400 houses? But suddenly the beloved field was in danger of being covered with rooftops. How could we in the community keep the field in Broomfield and keep the area that we loved and considered the centerpiece of our town open and undeveloped? Then, as the saying goes, that's when the fight began. So now we're going to go with the rest of these
Now
folks.
we're gonna bring some of the people that when Johnson Development was going to put 400 houses in, people got actively involved, and we'll start with Marlene, who's going to talk about her experiences.
I had been a parent volunteer at Birch Elementary, and a gentleman named Burns Arabo was a parent volunteer, and our sons were good little buddies. So one day Burns said to me, would you help to sell t-shirts? And would you also handle the finances and become the treasurer? And I said, sure. So the term keep the field in Broomfield had already been coined. Burns and I think some other people had decided on that, and there was a really cool image of a fox on the back of these original shirts that was in the field. So I said I'd be glad to do that, and have some old checkbooks here from the Broomfield Open. It says Broomfield Citizens for Parks and Open Space, and have a couple old checkbooks. And so I was doing this just an ordinary citizen, as the people that followed, and just as the story will reveal itself, ordinary people can do wonderful things for the betterment of this community, for today and for the tomorrows. And so I was keeping this checkbook as a treasurer, and one day my husband was looking over my shoulder and saw the checkbook in the red. And he said, I think you need some help.
Ellie, what year was this? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get a person. What year was this?
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't say that. That was about a quarter of a century ago. I'm glad you asked. Yes, about in 1993.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking that.
So my name's Rick Erickson, and I was taking a back seat to all this because I was in training at that time. When I looked over there, they were actually, then I looked at the treasurer's report, and things were kind of grim because they were, all their advertising funds were in those shirts. They had no money to advertise at that time because they'd spent X amount of dollars to purchase the shirts, but they hadn't sold enough to even break even at that point. So I went to the first meeting and I said, you know, you really need to get organized. You got to sell these shirts, because they were talking about what group is against us, what group is for us. I said, well, you don't have a campaign to get some money. So I started helping a little bit, and we got organized, and we sold a lot of shirts, and we got around $500 for the first campaign. That wasn't a lot of money. Plus we got some other contributions. And when the city council had to put this on the ballot, it couldn't be led by the citizens going in there and petitioning. Due to the structure of our city government at that time, ordinary citizens could not petition to put a financial issue on the ballot. So we had to work through city council. And city council, after they showed this outpouring of there was hundreds of people in this room about that Johnson development over there, they listened, and they were very responsive. And they put this on the ballot, but it had two things were on the ballot. One was for the 0.25% sales tax, and the other was for the bonding. And I was in a committee at that time, and we handed out a lot of flyers, and we worked very diligently, and we thought this was going to pass. However, there was two major problems. One was that someone who opposed this handed out information that was totally erroneous at the last minute. And about 4 days before the vote was to be taken, and in those days, most of us went to the polling places. It wasn't like a month or two procedure like it is now. So we could not counteract that at the last minute. The other thing was that we have a little blue ballot book that comes out with every 2 years when you have ballot issues. And anyone can submit anything into that ballot booklet. So they submitted the information to City Hall. And they had this number in there that said it was X amount of dollars per residence, and City Hall typed it up wrong when they submitted that, and it ended up being resident. So it looked like you were going to have to pay anywhere between $300 to $500 per year for this tax, and if you didn't do the calculations and look at how much it was for sales tax, some people just did the short thing and said, it's going to be very expensive. Well, City Council was so certain that this was going to pass that they formed a open space committee. And I was actually put on that committee. The night that the ballot issue results were published, we lost the open space tax by anywhere between 28 to 30 votes, depending on how you look at it. They had a recount. And that was out of almost 8,000. The bonding issue, which was around 3.6, well, about 3.5 million, plus or minus a couple $100,000, that did pass. But there was a lot of discouragement afterwards. A lot of people said, oh, we spent all this time and effort to try to get this passed, and we couldn't do it. The next month, Robert Schultz, who was the mayor, came to the Open Space Committee. And he said, don't worry, we're going to find you some money. And my question was, where? I mean, it's nice to promise things, but unless you have cash, there's only a few ways that you can get property. I mean, you can confiscate it, but we're in America, right? and or you could tax it, and we're in America, and that doesn't work either too well. Or you could just put certain restrictions on it, and that's not good either. So my feeling at that point was, I'm going to resign from the committee and go work to get this put back on the ballot again, because we lost so narrowly.
On the ballot in 1994.
In 1994. So what we did, we got together, about 4 of us, in my living room, and we said, we're not going to be defeated. We're going to go on, and we're going to push harder this time. And we're going to be better organized. So what we did was we published an open space newsletter. And here's the first one. And this somehow filtered all the way up to City Council. It has 2,037 sites ready for building this spring, and the city has more in the pipeline. And it was true. All this stuff was factually true. Broomfield building hits a record. 1992 was a great record, 352 permits. 1993 was an even better record, 560. And so we had to do something, quickly, because there was a lot of building pressure in the community. So we basically went back to the drawing board and organized very, very diligently. And we formed another committee. George Brandt became the president of that committee. I think Gene Patterson was the treasurer there. And we started writing letters to the editor of the Broomfield Enterprise, which did a very great job of publishing facts. We talked to a lot of our city council people. We had a mailing of about 250 people who were receiving this, so they would spread the information throughout the community. And then City Council blessed us with 2B, which was the 0.25% sales tax. Now, at that time, some people felt that we should provide more money for the parks. So when you say it's a 0.25%, 80% of that will go to open space, or was voted to go to open space, and 20% of that funding would go to the Parks and Recreation. So open space, when this passed, and it passed very significantly for a tax issue.
Could Ellie maybe talk a little bit about some of the citizens' efforts, to get it
Sure.
to pass?
And then we'll tell you what the results are.
Yeah.
Ellie is very hard at working. She shook the money tree.
Well, I came in a little bit late. I wasn't in on the first drive at all, but somehow I got word that it had failed, which really upset me because I love open space and I felt like we needed it. And this was the time for Broomfield to step up to the plate and buy it. So what we did to help produce this, we divided the town into sections. And we had a leader for each section. And they were to develop volunteers to go door to door to talk. We didn't want them just leaving the pamphlets. We wanted them to actually talk with the people. And I haven't seen that done since then. But we actually we put this out, we gave them all the phone numbers of all the city council people. And we wanted them to call them. Of course, there were no cell phones then, and we were hindered in some respects. But it was a very personal type of drive that we were doing, and we wanted everyone to participate. And I really wanted it to bring in more votes to really prove to the city council that the citizens of Broomfield really wanted this, not just half-heartedly, just a little win by a little bit. I wanted us to win by quite a bit. And one day I opened up the newspaper and there were headlines saying that the real estate North Metro Real Estate Association and the Chamber of Commerce had come out against the field. I thought I would die because these are two powerful groups in town, and to really go over them was going to be very, very difficult. But in the process, we bonded. We had a great time. We had a great team of people that really worked hard. And for most of you have no idea how much effort it took to do this. I'm sure it takes a lot of effort to do a lot of things that we take for granted, but this one did take a lot of effort, and a lot of people were involved, and a lot of people love their open space. And I know when people come to town, new people, they are amazed that we have open space right in the center of town. Now Boulder has open space, but they didn't have any space left that hadn't been developed, and so theirs is all around the edge of Boulder. And but thank goodness Broomfield wasn't that developed, though. For the master plan, almost everything had been designated for development. So we had to overcome that, because that was already in the master plan. But I can't tell you how much fun this has been to really work hard. It's just, and I think that all of you can have a better appreciation of the open space we have today because of all the work and effort that it took to make it
maybe
possible.
now, Rick, you could talk about it. So what were the results of the election?
Well, first I have to tell you a little bit about Ellie. She would shake the money tree. She did better than a soprano. I mean, she would get in there and she could. I knew she was going somewhere, I knew she would go talk to someone, and she could convince people that they needed to support this. And she had a group of two other ladies that were just fantastic. Anyways, this time around it passed significantly. Okay, it was 5,264. 3,691 against, which is basically 56.44%. So that was very, very good on a tax issue. And all the citizens' efforts that were put in there, and there was hours. There was a lot of people who just said, I want to help and walk around. Those people worked so hard, and we finally got the funding.
So Charles is going to speak next, and I guess what I wanted to talk about, and also having been on the dais when I was mayor for 6 years, one of the things Charles brought up that people will find of interest here is that the length of the hearings, and I think it was on the Johnson development itself, exceeded any oil and gas hearing. It went on for 20 hours, and so it was as we pulled this thing together, and I'll let Charles give some of the as we pulled this together. I thought it would be neat to have Charles, who's up on the dais, sitting next to George DeCiro, the city manager at that time, to talk about what it's like to have 20 hours of hearings and having, and having the public lobby. So, Charles, you want to share your experiences and I guess you're also going to talk a little bit about history and open space in Broomfield.
So, when you're in our position, George and mine, you need to be at those meetings the whole time, and along with the city council. So it's quite an experience to be involved in a 20-hour public hearing. I think it started, I think it was at the old number 6 Garden Center, city council chambers, and we were fortunate to be able to move it then to the senior center and have it in the large room there, because we needed the room, large enough to hold all the people who, number one, wanted to testify, and number two, wanted to stay and observe the proceedings. So I think the room, every time we had a hearing, the rooms were totally full throughout the entire hearing. And so it did go 20 hours over 3 different days, I believe. And for sure it made a substantial impression on everybody involved. But I think it didn't create a new idea. It accentuated an older idea that was part of the values in Broomfield that had been developing over a long period of time. But I think the issue was growth. The land was getting used up, and it was, time. We were running out of time in order to acquire the land that was needed for open space as the community built out. But I did want to just give a little historical background, and thank you for coming, Hank Stovall, tonight. Hank is was one of our longest serving city council members in Broomfield. And I think you lived through quite a bit. And I believe you also lived through were you live through this 20-hour public hearing? Say it again. The 20-hour public hearing on the field? Yeah. Okay, so I believe, Hank really can appreciate remembering back then. But, going way back, it's interesting. Broomfield has always been a master plan city. And in fact, Broomfield in 1964 adopted its first master plan, which may have been maybe the first master plan city in Colorado. First master plan in Colorado. So I think that's a good and significant fact. But when it first started, before it was incorporated, it was started by a developer, and I believe, Midway Park is kind of a unique area, and I believe the reason why Midway Park is situated where it is because it's actually a drainage area as well. And so for many years after the first houses were built, the park was not developed. But I think one of the first citizen activists in Broomfield, one of the leaders was Thelma Banchbach. Some of you may remember Thelma. I see some heads nodding. I think she helped lead the charge to get Midway Park developed into a park from a drainage area. And so I think there's a combination of the fact that you have this unique area, and that's my first memory of Broomfield. When I first came here, I drove into town and I drove down Midway, and I got a special feeling. This is different. Broomfield is different. You got this park, and then it just seems to go on and on and on. And I think that was a real important facility that was created, at least initially, and then developed over time. But also this idea of citizen activism. I think getting parks built and getting programs going, that led to Broomfield becoming a city back in 1961. So it started in 1955 by a developer, but after the people moved in, it soon became a city as people decided that they did need to take matters into their own hands and try to move things along. Broomfield's, as I said, Broomfield's first master plan was in 1964. I noticed in there that there was a standard. There weren't any maps, but there was a standard. It said that there should be 10 acres of park per 1,000 people. Okay? And that was, I'm guessing that was pretty unique back in then, because later, after George DeCero was hired, he was hired in 1968, I just read a report that he wrote talking about the 1969 bond election that was to buy 71 acres. And guess where that 71 acres is? Way back then in 1969. It's where our city hall is, okay? Which is connected to the field. Field lies to the north. And so there's like 71 acres there. It went from Main Street over to Brunner Reservoir. Well, the city council at that time decided that they needed to start to get to that standard of 10 acres per thousand. And they put 2 questions on the ballot. One question was to buy their field back in 1969 for $155,000, which would have been about $2,183 an acre back then. Could have got 71 acres. And that would have been a park instead of a city hall, it is today. And there was also a storm drainage bond question for $132,000. And I guess drainage needed to get down to Midway Park. The results were storm drainage passed by 762 votes to 534 votes. Pretty large margin to fix that. There was an active campaign against purchasing the park land. And it failed 821 to 470. And so things change, right?
Things happen for a reason.
Things happen for a reason too. That's true. And so, just an FYI, that standard has gone from 10 acres per thousand in Broomfield to 24 acres per thousand in Broomfield for parks and open space in terms of when we have new development, that's what we try to acquire. The other thing I wanted to point out was that during that Oak Hill development that was previously mentioned, there was a negotiation at that time, and that's when we were able to acquire Community Park, which is where the pond is and the park is that goes from Main Street over to the community center, and the land for the community center. So that was through a negotiation on this 2,000 unit residential development that never got built. And then the ball fields came from the Mountain Empire Dairymen's Association development that was supposed to go to the south from where this library is now over to 120th. And now that's going to turn into Broomfield's Civic Center of the future. So that's kind of a background of what happened in the early days. I just wanted to show one other thing. In terms of master planning in Broomfield, this is the 1974 master plan. And so I think you can see that it was a plan that showed parks and interconnected open areas. You see some of that in place now. Emerald Park is part of this, and the Brandywine is now part of this. But back in 1974, there was some value. Open space and parks were given a value amongst the citizens. But it's all a matter of how important it is at any particular point in time. So, and the other thing I wanted to do is just read something from the Open Space Master Plan in 1974. Open space objectives: to enhance the community by providing significant quantities of open space throughout for permanent use and benefit of citizens of Broomfield. One advantage of a small town is the availability of nearby open space for view and or usage. The interlinking greenbelt system will reserve at least part of this atmosphere, plus providing ample recreational opportunity. The periphery greenbelt system will help maintain the local physical identity of Broomfield. And so I think the value was there. The question was how much emphasis was there and how much will was there, both yeah, in the community and in the, in the elected officials over time. And so that's, I think, part of the backdrop of the great story of the field. I think the other significant development that occurred over time was this ethic of a large percentage of open space and open land be acquired in Broomfield to try to preserve the openness. And I think in that period of time, back in the early 90s, the city council did entertain the idea of a vision of Broomfield as pockets of development in a sea of open space. Okay, and that's the vision. And so I think that has been there for quite a long time, but when the rubber meets the road, most of the land is owned by private parties. And so when Johnson Development came forward, the rubber was meeting the road there, and the citizens' participation in that made all the difference in the world in terms of finally acquiring the ground here, and it also made all the difference in the world in terms of voting for the funds that would be needed in order to acquire it. I would also mention one other thing about this bigger concept of open space in Broomfield. If you look at the entire master plan for Broomfield, you can see that Broomfield has strategically acquired a lot of open space, not only by us, but by others. And one of the key projects that helped to make that happen was the Northwest Parkway. And so when the Northwest Parkway was proposed to go through both Broomfield and Boulder County, Broomfield chose to put the parkway in open space. As you see, it goes from I-25 over to 287. We and the community and the city council, Broomfield worked strategically with the Archdiocese and other landowners and Boulder County to coordinate acquiring large tracts of open space along the parkway as the parkway alignment was developed. And the other agreement that was made at the time was that Broomfield would work cooperatively with Boulder County and Lafayette and the city of Louisville to acquire forms of private open space through purchasing conservation easements in that whole area that goes from 287 over to US 36. And so as you see the road going through there, that happened through that, that strategy, but also through that agreement between the four governments to try to help make that happen. So I think, I don't think that would have happened if it hadn't been for citizens engaging and fortifying this ethic of having open lands and open space throughout our community.
Thank you, Charles. And so I guess kind of set what's going to happen at this point in time. We have a film that happened to be done by my daughter and Carlene's daughter, Elaine, along with her good friend Capri. She'd approached me 2 years ago about something history within Broomfield that she could do a project on, and it had to be over 20 years. And so Elaine and Capri did this video, and so we're going to kind of close out the field discussion with this video that that I was encouraged to show. I mean, I certainly everybody wanted it to be shown. It's not just a father and a mother being proud here, and then. And then we're going to move on to some of the stuff that Charles was talking about and have Dan talk about 1999. Well, 84 was really significant acquiring the field. there were other things that then occurred in 99 and other years that then created the entire project that could exist. But we'll go ahead and show the film now.
Although Theodore Roosevelt created the idea of keeping undeveloped land undeveloped and passed on a meaningful message of conservation, Rick Erickson, Eleanor McKinley, Gene Patterson, and Gordon McKellar followed in his footsteps and showed leadership by bringing a community together to save the undeveloped land in Broomfield. What was left behind was a changed community and plenty of open land that remains untouched.
Theodore Roosevelt inspired the nation to preserve undeveloped land. All of the damage being inflicted on the environment became one of his biggest concerns, so when he became president in 1901, he used his authority to protect the land. He created 150 national forests, 5 national parks, and much more. He protected about 230 million acres of public land during his years as president, and in the process, encouraged others to do the same.
The field is the pride of Broomfield. It is a vast expanse of open land. But the land was once threatened by a company called Johnson's Development. The company had bought the field in 1991, and by 1992 it had plans to build a 433-home subdivision on the 140 acres that made up the area.
There were mixed responses from the Broomfield citizens. Some thought that because Johnson's Development owned the land, they had every right to build on it. Others believed that by developing the land, a beautiful part of Broomfield would be destroyed. On March 2, 1993, the development was denied by Broomfield City Council. Shortly after, Johnson's Development began to sue the city due to the denial. So instead of denying the development, the city decided to attempt to buy the field. However, this buy would be very pricey for the city. Broomfield City Council would have to purchase 118 acres from Johnson's Development at a price of about $40,000 per acre. This added up to a total of about $4.7 million. To fund this, a new sales tax was requested by the citizens. The sales tax would add 0.25% to Broomfield's current tax. The City Council decided to put the issue on the ballot when 500 citizens came to support it. There are 2 separate questions that got placed. The first, 2A, was to approve the 0.25% open space sales tax. The second, 2B, was to approve the purchase of the field. This tax increase would eventually allow the city of Broomfield to buy the field, preventing construction.
In the summer of 1993, a group called Broomfield Citizens for Parks and Open Space was formed in an attempt to get the open space sales tax passed. The people who joined wanted to help campaign and raise money. The theme Keep the Field in Broomfield was created, and the group bought t-shirts to sell to raise money for the cause. However, the purchase of the shirts left little money for other fundings. This was when Rick Erickson got involved. Rick helped sell the t-shirts and raised about $800. They continued to campaign and raise as much money as they could until the election would decide what would be done with the field.
On November 1993, the election for the open space sales tax was held. The second issue, 2B, which was concerning the purchase of the field, passed. However, issue 2A, the sales tax increased, did not, losing by only 28 votes. Yet this was mostly because of misinformation. This led the voters to believe the tax was higher than it really was. This misinformation detrimentally hurt the amount of votes for the sales tax. It was discouraging, but some chose to look on the bright side. The open space sales tax had only lost by 28 votes. Just thinking about how close they were to reaching their goal made some people work even harder to achieve it. If I'm going to spend hours of my time, Rick Erickson said, I'd rather spend it getting the question back on the ballot. He indeed spent much more than hours to see the tax passed.
Leadership means you actually see a goal and you realize that you got certain things that you got to get through, and you realize it's not going to be easy, but you're just going to have to persist, and sometimes it's just a pure willpower that keeps you going. I mean, a lot of times I felt defeated and we got low on cash, but you just got to say, this is the goal. You got to keep focused. You got to keep pounding, and it's just sort of like it's like a football game. You just got to keep going and going and going. You're never sure you're going to win, but if you don't push it hard, you'll definitely lose.
In the January of 1994, Rick Erickson gathered others, including Eleanor McKinley, Gene Patterson, and Gordon McKellar, to help get the issue of the field back on the ballot. These 4 people showed a great amount of leadership in doing so. They faced what seemed to be insurmountable opposition. All of the established business organizations, such as the Chamber of Commerce and the Realtors Association, opposed the new sales tax. even the city council wasn't advocating for it. The council thought that this would hurt the business and growing population of Broomfield, and that open space was not necessary for the community. But this did not stop Erickson, Patterson, McKinley, and McKellar. The group stood up for what they wanted and showed how ordinary citizens could make a difference. They believed that open space was just as important as houses and wanted people to have it. To help get the funding going, they needed to gather more open space supporters. To do this, they got together and wrote open space newsletters, which informed people about open space and its importance in community. As the number of newsletters increased, so did the number of open space supporters. In August 1994, the issue got back on the Broomfield ballot.
Rick Erickson, Eleanor McKinley, Jean Patterson, and Gordon McKellar truly pushed for the open space sales tax. They were the people to follow. Erickson helped recruit more for the Broomfield Citizens for Parks and Open Space Committee, and soon the group had about 20 members. They encouraged the community and gave people a better understanding of the field and how it helped the community.
We sent out newsletters and talked to people, and we realized that many people felt the same way we did, and so we decided to get it back onto the initiative for the next election to try to pass the property tax.
Another effort the committee made was to divide Broomfield into sections for each member to visit. There, they would go door to door to try to persuade the resident to vote for the Broomfield open space sales tax. All of this advertising finally paid off in the election. In November 1994, the open space sales tax passed.
One of the things that happened was that people really pulled together, and when it was all said and done, it worked. But it wasn't easy. It was not easy to do it because we felt like we were going to fail at one time because there was so much opposition. But the people the people that worked hard had a passion for it. And when you talk about leadership, I really think the leaders have to have a passion for whatever they're doing.
3 years later, the field was purchased on April 4th, 1997 for $4.6 million. The legacy of this tax can still be seen today. Broomfield's field is flourishing with breathtaking wildlife, beautiful ponds, scenic trails, and so much more. This rich pocket of nature at the heart of Broomfield helps all of its citizens remember the fight to keep it. And there is more to come. Broomfield's comprehensive master plan was adopted in 1995. It set a goal of 40% of Broomfield being open lands. Later on, in 1999, the Broomfield City Council created the Open Space and Trails Advisory Committee. In 2005, the Open Space, Parks, Recreation, and Trails Master Plan was created. This plan laid out in detail what the intentions were for the future of the field and how the city was going to achieve its goal of 40% open lands. Today, Broomfield has 7,875 acres of open land, which is 32.8% of the city. The hard work of preparing the master plans has been paying off in the benefits of the community and environment. All of the open land and trails gives and promotes a more healthy, happy lifestyle for the citizens of Broomfield. Meanwhile, Broomfield's wildlife enjoys a natural and untouched home.
And after 1994, I got actively involved in Broomfield's open space program, and I became the chair of the Broomfield Open Space and Trails Committee in 2000, and got elected mayor in 2007. Broomfield's open space is our pride. When you talk to citizens of Broomfield, they talk about open space and trails as one of the major reasons why they moved here, and none of that would have occurred without Rick Erickson and the leadership of that group of people back in 1994.
The great wilds of our country, once held to be boundless and inexhaustible, are being rapidly invaded and overrun in every direction, and everything destructible in them is being destroyed. This quote from John Muir conveys that humans simply need to stop destroying the natural world, and with leaders such as Rick Erickson, Eleanor McKinley, Jean Patterson, and Gordon McKellar, maybe we will.
The field was the start of it, but in its passing was a huge deal. But when it came down to 1999, we had the field. We didn't have our master plan and some of the other things talking about. And I guess I'll segue in this for Dan that some consultants, and I'm going to show a timeline in a few minutes to show you all the open space stuff that occurred. I'll go through it really quick, but that'll be in a few minutes. But in 1999, the rec department had a study done, and Hank can correct me here because I give a lot of credit for Hank on city council in changing the tide of Broomfield. But it had been recommended by these consultants that we put soccer fields on the field, and it was a let's just say it this way: everybody who felt content in Broomfield came out and got active, and that was when I got active, extremely active. And I guess I want Dan to talk a little bit about it because Dan formed an ad hoc committee that, and I'll show some of the goals in a minute. But Dan, you want to talk about, from your perspective, what was going on in 1999?
Well, I think there was a sense of relief and certainly satisfaction when council purchased the field in 1997. But quickly it became obvious to some of us that there were competing groups who had designs on that property. I mean, we just assumed initially that there was going to be open space. Well, it wasn't quite that simple. The consulting group came in and made recommendations. Groups came forward asking for some of that property. We, the open space folks, thought that wasn't not that those other groups' goals weren't important, but we didn't want them to realize their goals on our field. So with that in mind, we formed an ad hoc committee, and most of the members that were on that committee are sitting here this evening at the table, and Rob Bodine was part of that group. And we decided that it would probably be, we could be most effective if we influenced the upcoming city council elections, meaning that we sought out people who were sympathetic and to open space in general. And we interviewed all the candidates that year that were going to be running for city council seats, and had, clearly pointed questions for them, and endorsed certain candidates based on their responses. And I think we had an influence on that election, clearly. With that done, our group kind of moved forward and decided that with the competing interests and designs on the field, that we needed to make sure that council understood where residents stood on these issues relative to use of the field. So we, again, with council's help, I think, Hank, had public meetings, and people turned out to express their interest and their feeling of how the field should be used, the different quadrants. And I think there was a large turnout, and I think that gave council some direction again, as they were deciding on how that land should be used. And then having got together as a group, we decided that it was clearly important for the city to kind of embrace open space, not just the field, but the concept in a more comprehensive way. So we started among ourselves, debated, discussed, and came up with recommendations that we made to council that year with regards to the open space program. And perhaps one of the major goals, one of our goals, and one of our recommendations was to hire an open space director. I mean, it just seemed to make sense that we had someone to oversee the program as it moved forward. And we, in fact, just recommended a half-time person, to be honest with you. And George DeCiro and others on city staff decided that wasn't totally appropriate. Really, it needed to be a full-time person, and which was a pleasant surprise to us, and I think a good decision by city staff. So we also made several other recommendations. Are you going to go over those, Pat? Do you want me? Oh, okay.
Just go ahead and go over it.
Well, we also decided that even though the open space tax had passed, that it had a sunset provision in it, and it wasn't, and we were concerned about that because it became obvious quickly to us that in order to expand the open space that we had in Broomfield, the land was going to have to be purchased. There was just no question about that. And so even though the first Open Space Advisory Committee, which I sat on and Pat sat on, we came up with a recommendation of properties that we thought should be purchased as soon as possible, as soon as financially possible. But it was clear that there, and Charles pointed this out, I think repeatedly to us, that while our goals were admirable, you know, the bottom line was where's the money going to come from? And so even though we had an open space tax, we were concerned that it was going to expire ultimately, and then we'd be left with no funds at all again. So we pushed and encouraged council. We didn't push council. We encouraged council to develop the open space tax and have it put on the ballot again, and so it would be the tax would be in perpetuity. And so there would be funds going forward regardless of what properties were going to be purchased. And we didn't have to worry about that issue. We also pushed hard for and encouraged that the open space develop a trail system for residents to use. That was another priority we had. And the charter amendment to protect open space in perpetuity, so it couldn't be used for other purposes. And what else did we do?
Well, we wanted money for the field because it was just sitting there, and so we wanted improvements to the field.
That's right. So those recommendations, as you see listed here, are recommendations that we made to council. They reviewed those and embraced, I think, the majority of those. And so OSTAC continued, and not all the properties, but many of the properties have an interesting history. And I don't think we're going to get into that tonight, but it was never, I don't know really how to phrase this, it was never really easy. You know, you think this going forward, now you have open space tax, right? You have a lot of citizens who support open space. So what could be the, you know, what are the obstacles? What could be a problem? Well, there were a lot of problems. I mean, with almost, not all purchases, but with many. I mean, there was just competing interests again for those properties. And there was an issue of money and how to pay for them all, even though we had a sales tax now. So it was, the history of open space is an interesting piece of Broomfield's history, I can tell you. And so I'd encourage you this evening, if you didn't get one already, to pick up one of these brochures. And there's some in the back if you don't have one. Because the Open Space Department, Kristen Pritz, and others put together really a nice timeline that gives you a good sense of how the open space program has evolved over time. So thanks for coming tonight. I hope I hope you found this kind of interesting. We did.
Yeah, let me run through the timeline really quickly in a couple of minutes. Charles had established that the city had a concept of emphasizing open lands throughout from Midway Park. The first open space dedication was in Lockamore, and everybody, you know, west of here, you know, in 1977, 123 acres. My good friend, everybody's good friend, Walt Spader, at least he was my good friend, always points out in open space that when Interlochen was developed, that it was a planned community that had parks and open space and trails throughout it, and it was unique for Denver. I'd worked at the Denver Tech Center, and the concept of Interlochen was dramatically different, that incorporated open lands and open space throughout it, which I think is significant. Here's the things we've been talking about, the 93 and 94 votes, and you know, the 15-year sunset. In 1995, the comprehensive plan was adopted. The 74 plan, I think, got revised a couple of times. And in 1995, the concept of having the 40% open lands goal, it was 44%, Kristen tells me, when it was originally passed. It got revised to 40% when they did the math on it. And, and so the concept in that, that was when I was working on Boulder County Open Space at the time. I was on their committee. That's because being a CPA and all, I met with Charles like in 96, 97 and said, how the hell are you going to pay for all this? And it was fascinating. The 40% goal was put in the master plan without a financing plan, but it set the bar at a high rate, and a rate we're going to hit. I mentioned the field being acquired. Charles mentions, I do think it's significant for everybody to know that in 97, 98, and 99, there was a series of IGAs that are occurring for the Parkway and occurring for Broomfield to become a county. And those set the buffer areas like Ruth Roberts, the open space that's on the other side of 287. It was purchased by Boulder County through bonds of Boulder County, but it became our open space so that we could put on our maps because we paid a pretty good price for it. 8.9 million is what I have. That in order to become a county, we bought Boulder County out of our obligation. Lord knows how that negotiation 8.9 came on, but that's really significant, including the Parkway becoming, surrounded by open lands. This is the one we're talking about, 1999. The city consultant recommends soccer fields on the field, and this is where we started doing the definition. If you've been involved in open space, I'm seeing Marnie look over here. There's a huge difference between open lands and open space. And it's not really understood by everybody, but open space is basically left untouched. You have trails there, and open lands is parks, it's golf courses. And I think that was the year when we defined that for the community, that the field was bought as open space and you really couldn't change the use of it. But that night, and I'm going to make it, that's where, Hank, I'm glad you were invited. Because I remember that night so well, and I think it was in October of 1999, when the council denied the soccer fields, said they wouldn't have the soccer fields go forward. And I'll give credit to, because I don't think David will mind. Dave Manley was in charge of soccer in town, and so we had all these cute soccer kids come up in their soccer uniforms and lobby for more soccer fields. Yeah, it's pretty. So you had all these people advocating for open space. And I think I give Hank credit for it. He may want to make a comment, but Hank was the one, and there's always, when you're in city council, there's one person who kind of brings the thoughts together, and Hank basically said, we can't put soccer fields on there, but we've got to find places for those kids to play soccer. And Hank, I'm talking about you, so.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
It's not commonly known, but I spent a good long amount of time in Boulder County on the Planning Commission at the same time he was on open space. And one thing I learned from Boulder County was, having helped write the comp plan for Boulder County, was they had a great respect for open space. In fact, if you look at the county open space plan, 35% of it's painted green, and that was to designate it as open space. Anyway, long story short, when I heard the proposal to put ball fields on the open space people went ballistic, rightfully so, they should have. It was the dumbest thing I ever heard of. We had to have a parking lot. 3 ball fields wouldn't have done us any good at all. This is probably not commonly known, but Larry Cooper and I, one evening, went out on Sheridan Boulevard at about 14th Street and looked east. There was a guy by the name of Robertson that had 40 acres that he's willing to sell. We come back to council and proposed an 80-acre parcel, which would now be the commons. And the council said, why don't you go for 160? Well, Mrs. Miller, if she would have sold out, we'd have had the north end of her 40. We only bought the south end. So we bought 120 acres for ball fields, defused the whole situation, best thing that ever happened. When I look forward to my 24 years on council, there's about 4 things that I look to that I appreciate and enjoy doing. Saving the field, the commons, helping clean up Rocky Flats to a reasonable risk level, and becoming a county. Good luck.
So that was perfect. That's exactly how I remember it. We talked about the recommendations, of the people going ballistic. While we were ballistic, we were very specific on what we were asking for, and I think that is significant in activism. The Open Space Committee gets formed. We get a separate PRAC, which is the Parks and Recreation Committee, gets formed in 2000. So go back to our recommendation. In 2000, we hire the Open Space Director. I'm making a comment here on August 11, 2000, Flatiron Mall opens, and that 0.25% sales tax is now kind of quadrupled overnight. And so it became huge, and so one by one, we're starting to achieve our goals. We adopt the field master plan that's shown there. November 15, 2001, we became a county. It got approved in 1999. It was significant, too, to give Broomfield the latitude, to do the stuff it wanted to. Hank also worked on this. In 2001, we put on the ballot making the tax go in perpetuity. With perpetuity means until the voters change it. I mean, there's no such thing as perpetuity, but we like to think it's perpetuity. And I remember Hank getting involved in that because Hank's attitude was if you're going to go in perpetuity, you need to allow maintenance and other things, down the road. And so there were certain key people that formed the language on that. And I think it passed by 78%. I mean, and in 2003, OSTAC and Dan and Kristen and I got involved with Pulte. And this was kind of unique too, because Pulte was developing the entire Anthem area. It's called Preble Creek or something at the time. And we worked with Pulte, and sometimes Pulte was very reluctant to do it. But to get them to have the open space similar to what we had down here, an integrated trail system, and as it turned out, it became a really good selling mark for Pulte. And so I always felt that was significant. 2005, we buy the county commons that Hank talks about, which I think it totals 200 and some acres if you count the open space.
It was 120 for ball fields.
Right, and then like 115 for open space. And so in 2005, we really it was 2003, 2004, we do an open space parks, recreation, trails master plan, which a lot of the trails that we're finishing now were identified in there. We brought in some consultants. And it was, once again, we planned out the trails and they're being built slowly but surely, and sometimes fast. And then 2006, the last item that we had in the 1999 group was the charter amendment. And really the charter amendment, it's a series of processes that occur. If council would ever decide to change the use, you can't sell open lands without a vote of the people, but you could change the use of open lands. So like if they wanted a children's hospital there, council could do that, and at that point in time, before 1A was passed, they could do that without the citizens having a say, and 1A says the citizens have a say, and it's I think everybody considers it very significant. Really significant here, and we have a gentleman here from Adams County Open Spaces. In 2006, Metzger Open Space was bought as a joint property with Westminster and Adams County, and the land is in Westminster, and we share governance of it with Westminster. The mayor, both mayors serve on the city managers both serve on the foundation. And there were some themes. Rick kind of outlined these, so Kristen put them out there. Having the impact on what we're looking back on what made a difference. Number one, citizens can have an impact, and we're all trying to impact government now. Rick had this line, which Charles liked. You can go through the process and not burn down City Hall. And I think and once again, Rick had talked, the group, and I didn't really get involved until 1999. I was on Boulder County side. The group was always thoughtful, always wanted to give recommendations to the council that were achievable recommendations, even though we were loud, but we were reasonable. And Dan made the point that nurture your vision over time with a strong, respectable, and thoughtful approach. I would say to get the 40% open lands goal, to make sure that north of here we have open space, in the northern part of town above Highway 7, the same way we do down here, which is something I think we all consider to be significant. We'll have to continue to urge council, and sometimes it becomes financial issues, and there's been 2 or 3 times in the last 5 years where council's been reluctant to use, they only want to use open space funds and there's not enough. So over time, we may have to encourage council, and I'll just Kristen says that, and I shouldn't put you on the spot like that, but this council that we have right now is very amenable to open space, and that perseverance pays off. And we're part of this. We're trying to pass the baton to the next generation, but there weren't a lot of young people who showed up tonight. So, but this will be on Channel 8, so we'll get them to watch it. Parents, You make your grandkids and kids watch it. So I'd let anybody who wants to share stories or wants to ask questions. We would love to hear.
Let me
them.
make one comment before we start questions. Is that through this whole process that's gone on for 20 years, there's been a lot of players involved, both citizens and council members. But one thing that's been consistent through that whole period has been the open space department we have here in Broomfield. And Pete and Kristen, who run that department, have been incredibly supportive. I mean, everything that's been done has been done because they worked so closely with us and worked so hard for us to help reach our goals. So know that the current department, Open Space Department, really played a big part in everything that you saw occurred this evening after the field was purchased. So.
Yeah, and I'd point out, and there is a group that we all got involved, Dan and I, got involved in, the Open Space and Trails and Advisory Committee that continues to be the official, advisory committee to City Council. And so it's not only us with the Open Space Foundation and others, but it's also OSTAC that, that helps council form its opinion. So, hey.
One last thing, not commonly known, but one of the best things we ever did, there was much demand for a cemetery with the acquisition of the ground at the Commons. We now have an upgraded cemetery. It's being expanded, and it's probably one of the best in the area. So that was a good thing that came out of the acquisition of the lands out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I remember the Open Space Committee, and I don't know if he was chair, but Bob Davenport was real key on that, I think that cemetery committee was in existence for like 12 years before they finally got the cemetery, and they were getting older. Bob, I'm sure, is interred there, and so, but you're right, it was great.
And they kept claiming they could die here but couldn't be buried here.
Yeah.
Until that was finished.
Well, that's where the Commons was such a unique deal because, to George and Charles's credit, there was 5 different developers in there, or 5 different landowners in there, and they went to work, with council support to get it done.
As a relatively new resident of Broomfield, I congratulate you all for what you got accomplished, particularly since I understand there are a huge number of new developments about to go in. Each one has a couple of thousand housing units. So a lot of the areas that we think of as open space, because they have been, really are going to be just plastered with housing. So I was wondering, going forward, are there any new open space areas? You mentioned north of Route 7, there might be something.
Yeah, I'll let Kristen answer that question because she's more, I presume Charles Kristen would be the right one to. Sure.
So we bought about 132 acres called the Harmer Open Space, and it's north of State Highway 7 and east of County Road 7 and west of I-25. And although this second site is not open space, we're also looking at a park acquisition called Professor's Property that's about 75 acres, and that actually abuts I-25, and it will abut our Harmer open space. And then we're getting another 15 acres from the developer to the south. So what we're envisioning is something that is not quite as large as Broomfield County Commons, but it will use the same principles of having a big chunk of open space and also park, and be in that kind of State Highway 7 I-25 quadrant over there. And then we're starting to look, we have been looking on the east side of I-25 too, to try to see what we can do over there. Because I think a big part of our master plan is to keep the character of Broomfield throughout Broomfield as the community grows, so that we have open space and parks and trails throughout the community.
I have a question. Where is the butterfly pavilion going to be in relationship to that open space?
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have a map for you tonight, but you know where Sienna Reservoir is and Sheridan Boulevard? Yeah. As you take Sheridan Boulevard up towards State Highway 7, on your right And south of State Highway 7, it will be in that general area. If you think of where Prospect Academy is, that charter school,
Right.
it's just a little north and a little east of there, and it's in the property or the project that's owned by the McGuinneys. And that area now is called Baseline. And they're coming up with some incredibly creative ideas about what will be happening at the Butterfly Pavilion with the adjacent school, and talking to a variety of scientists and businesses to really make an amazing synergy up there.
Make it a science park.
Yeah.
That's why I was
kind of
interested in
Science
where it was
City, is that
located.
the proper term?
And there's plans for, I think it's 8 acres to be like a, what's the word for it? Pollinator pathway, where they can show that. And I'll let Charles and Chris correct me, but one of my basic thoughts about Broomfield is that Broomfield is very driven by its master plan, and our master planning process. So if you go to the website for the city and county, there are comprehensive plan maps that will show that there's green planned up in all these areas. We don't have you still have that, right? And so the point is that when a developer comes to town, the developer knows what the plan is for it, and developer, if it's residential, has to do a land dedication, or give money in lieu of land dedication. But we have identified on the map the areas that we want to be open space, even if it hasn't been developed yet.
And I think it's important to realize, if you have an interest or a passion for open space, hopefully what came through this evening as we all spoke is that the plan's not done, as Pat just indicated, and you as residents certainly can assume an important role in ensuring that the plan unfolds as it appears in the master plan. So it's something to think about as you follow events with regards to development.
Has the income from the mall decreased over the years since the mall has gotten a bit slower?
The mall's been pretty stable, and so far, so good. The area next to the mall is called Flatiron Marketplace. Has kind of gone kaput.
But it's in the hands of Kroenke, right?
Right, and so that area has been purchased by the Kroenke Group, and they're proposing that it be redeveloped into a mixed-use development where they'll mix some residential with over retail and restaurants. And so that's on its way, but the mall itself is still very stable. And but we shouldn't rest on our laurels. It needs to continue to evolve in a manner that serves what the public wants, and our public's wants are changing. So we continue to work with them to encourage them to be proactive in following that and following the market.
Any other questions? Anybody want to provide any observations that they've had over the years? And we'll just thank everybody for coming. Hopefully you enjoyed it.